Daddy, why do numbers dance in my head when I'm sleepy?
8-year-old Sophie Parker looked up from her pillow with the kind of serious expression that always made Ethan's heart squeeze tight. Her auburn curls framed a face that reminded him so much of Sarah, but her eyes held a mathematical curiosity that was entirely her own. "Because numbers are alive, sweetheart," Ethan replied softly, checking the glucose monitor on her nightstand. "They dance when you're peaceful because that's when your mind can see their patterns most clearly. Will they dance for me in my dreams? Always. And maybe tonight they'll show you something new." As Sophie drifted off to sleep, Ethan Parker remained beside her bed for a few more minutes, watching the steady rise and fall of her breathing and listening to the quiet beep of her insulin pump. At 32, he had learned to find peace in these midnight moments when the world was quiet and his daughter was safe and healthy. 3 years had passed since Sarah's death in that terrible car accident, 3 years since their lives had been turned inside out by grief and a type 1 diabetes diagnosis that came just weeks after they'd lost the person who should have been there to help them navigate it. But somehow they had built a life that worked. It wasn't the life Ethan had planned when he was a promising doctoral candidate at Ohio State. But it was good. It was enough. He kissed Sophie's forehead gently and made his way to the small kitchen of their apartment where he would spend the next hour preparing for his night shift at Riverside Community College. The janitorial work wasn't glamorous, but it paid for their health insurance and Sophie's medical supplies while allowing him to be home every morning when she woke up. At 11 p.m., Ethan arrived at Riverside Community College, carrying his maintenance cart and a thermos of coffee that would need to last until dawn. The campus was quiet except for the occasional student studying late in the library, and Ethan preferred it that way. The solitude gave him time to think, to process the day, and sometimes to remember who he used to be before everything changed. His first stop was always the mathematics building, where he would clean classrooms that still smelled faintly of chalk and intellectual ambition. Room 247 was his favorite. A small classroom where advanced algebra was taught to community college students who were often pursuing education later in life, sometimes against significant obstacles. As he pushed open the door to 247, Ethan was surprised to find the lights still on and a lone figure bent over the whiteboard at the front of the room. She was a young woman with long blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing an elegant red dress that seemed too formal for late-night mathematics. She appeared to be struggling with a complex proof, erasing and rewriting the same section repeatedly. "Excuse me," she said without turning around. "I know it's late, but could I have just a few more minutes? I'm trying to work through this convergence proof, and I'm almost there." Ethan should have explained that he was just the janitor, that he needed to clean the room, that mathematical proofs were no longer his concern. Instead, he found himself looking at the equations on the board with the kind of focused attention he hadn't allowed himself in years. The proof she was attempting was elegant in concept, but she was getting tangled in unnecessary complexity, missing a simpler approach that would eliminate 3 steps of calculation. You might try approaching it from the limit definition instead of the series expansion, Ethan heard himself say. The woman turned around, revealing intelligent green eyes and a face that showed both exhaustion and surprise. "What do you mean?" Ethan hesitated. He was wearing a maintenance uniform and pushing a cart full of cleaning supplies. She was clearly a professor or graduate student working on advanced mathematics. The social distance between them was vast, the professional boundaries clear. But the mathematics was beautiful, and he hadn't talked about real mathematical concepts with anyone in 3 years. If you define the sequence in terms of its limiting behavior, rather than its term-by-term construction, the convergence becomes more obvious, he explained, moving closer to the board. The series expansion approach works, but it's like taking the long way around a mountain instead of finding the direct path. "Show me," she said, handing him the marker with an expression of genuine curiosity rather than skepticism. For the next 20 minutes, Ethan found himself working through mathematical concepts he had almost forgotten he loved. His hands moved across the whiteboard with growing confidence, as muscle memory returned the elegant language of mathematics flowing from his mind onto the board in clean, logical steps. "That's brilliant," the woman said, as the proof concluded with satisfying simplicity. "I've been working on that problem for 2 hours and couldn't see the forest for the trees." She looked at him with new interest. "I'm Rebecca Harrison, but everyone calls me Becca. I teach mathematics here. Ethan Parker. I'm the night janitor." Her eyebrows rose slightly, but her expression showed curiosity rather than condescension. "Where did you study mathematics?" "Ethan, Ohio State. Graduate program in number theory. And now you're working as a janitor." The question might have sounded insulting from someone else, but Becca's tone held genuine interest rather than judgment. Ethan found himself giving an honest answer instead of the polite deflection he usually offered. "My wife died 3 years ago. Car accident. Our daughter was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes around the same time. I needed a job with health insurance and flexible hours that would let me be home for her medical care. The mathematics can wait." Becca was quiet for a moment, processing this information with the same careful attention she had given to the mathematical proof. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "That must have been incredibly difficult." "We've managed. Sophie is an amazing kid. Smart as anything and tougher than she should have to be at 8 years old." Sophie. That's a beautiful name. She's actually the one who keeps me connected to mathematics, always asking why things work the way they do, turning everyday situations into math problems. Yesterday she wanted to calculate the optimal angle for launching paper airplanes to achieve maximum distance. Ethan realized he was sharing more personal information than he had intended, but something about Becca's genuine interest made conversation feel natural, despite their awkward circumstances. "I should let you get back to your work," Becca said, gathering her papers and notebooks. "Thank you for the help with the proof. Your insight saved me hours of frustration." "You're welcome. Good luck with your research." As she headed toward the door, Becca paused and turned back. "Ethan, would it be inappropriate for me to ask about your background in number theory? If you're willing to share. What do you want to know?" "I'm curious about your research focus. Number theory is such a specialized field. I was working on prime distribution patterns, specifically looking at gaps between large primes and whether they follow predictable patterns at extreme scales." Her eyes widened with genuine interest. "That's fascinating. Are you familiar with the work being done on twin prime conjectures?" "Some of it. My advisor at Ohio State was Dr. Elizabeth Morrison. She's doing groundbreaking research on modular forms and their applications to prime distribution." Elizabeth Morrison. She's legendary. Her work on L functions is revolutionizing the field. You know her work? I did my dissertation research on related topics at University of Chicago. Dr. Morrison's publications have been essential reading for anyone working in analytic number theory. They stood there for a moment, two mathematics enthusiasts who had found unexpected common ground in an unlikely setting. Finally, Becca seemed to remember the late hour and the unusual nature of their encounter. "I should really let you finish your work. Thank you again for the help." After Becca left, Ethan continued his cleaning routine, but his mind kept returning to their conversation. It had been years since he had talked to someone who understood advanced mathematics, years since he had felt the intellectual excitement that came from sharing complex ideas with someone who could appreciate their beauty. As he worked his way through the rest of the mathematics building, Ethan found himself thinking about the research he had abandoned, the doctoral dissertation that remained unfinished in a file cabinet at home. For 3 years he had told himself that mathematics was a luxury he couldn't afford, that Sophie's needs had to come first. But tonight, for just a few minutes, he had remembered what it felt like to be a mathematician, rather than just a man trying to survive. The next evening, Ethan arrived for his shift to find Becca still working in classroom 247, this time surrounded by stacks of papers that suggested she was grading exams rather than working on research. "Back for more late-night mathematics?" he asked from the doorway. Becca looked up with a smile that seemed genuinely pleased to see him. "Actually, I was hoping you might come by. I wanted to apologize if I seemed intrusive last night asking about your background. You weren't intrusive. It was nice to talk about mathematics with someone who understands it. I've been thinking about our conversation, about your research on prime distributions. What about it? Have you considered returning to graduate school? Finishing your dissertation?" Ethan felt a familiar tightness in his chest. The same feeling that came whenever anyone suggested that his current life wasn't sufficient, that he should want more than he had. Becca: "I have a daughter with a serious medical condition. I can't afford to be a starving graduate student. I need steady income and health insurance." "Of course. I didn't mean to suggest that your priorities aren't exactly right. I just wondered if you'd explored whether there might be ways to pursue both goals." "What do you mean?" "I mean that mathematical talent like yours shouldn't be wasted, and that there might be opportunities for people in your situation that you haven't considered." "Like what?" "Well, for instance, there are fellowship programs specifically designed for parents returning to graduate education. Full funding, health insurance, even childcare assistance." Ethan had heard of such programs, but had assumed they were so competitive as to be effectively unavailable to someone who had been out of academia for 3 years. Those fellowships go to people with perfect academic records and stellar recommendations. I left Ohio State without finishing my degree. Did you leave because of academic problems or because of family circumstances? Family circumstances? Entirely. Then your academic record should still be strong, and Dr. Morrison would presumably be willing to provide recommendations. You don't understand how competitive those programs are. Maybe not. But I do understand how rare it is to find someone who can see mathematical relationships the way you do. Last night you solved in minutes a problem that had been stumped me for hours. That's not the kind of insight that comes from textbook knowledge. That's mathematical intuition at a very high level. Becca's confidence in his abilities was both flattering and unsettling. For 3 years, Ethan had built his identity around being Sophie's father and primary caregiver. The possibility of returning to mathematics felt simultaneously appealing and terrifying. Even if such programs exist, the application process would be complicated. I'd need to update my research, prepare new proposals, convince an admissions committee that I'm still capable of doctoral-level work. What if I told you that I know about a specific program that might be perfect for your situation? One that values practical experience and unconventional backgrounds. What program? The Henderson Family Fellowship at Ohio State. It's designed specifically for parents who have had to interrupt their education for family reasons. Full tuition health insurance, living stipend, and the possibility of completing research while teaching part-time. That sounds too good to be true. It's very real. I know because I helped design the application criteria when I was consulting on graduate fellowship programs. Before we continue with this heartwarming story, please tell us where in the world you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. Over the following weeks, Ethan found his evening conversations with Becca becoming the highlight of his day. She would stay late in classroom 247, ostensibly working on her own research, but increasingly their time was spent discussing mathematical concepts, teaching philosophies, and the practical challenges of balancing intellectual ambition with family responsibilities. Becca was brilliant, clearly, but more than that, she was thoughtful and genuine in ways that surprised Ethan. She asked careful questions about Sophie's diabetes management, showed real interest in 8-year-old mathematical theories, and never made Ethan feel self-conscious about his current employment situation. "You know," Becca said one evening as they worked together on a particularly elegant proof, "I've been thinking about what you said regarding Sophie's mathematical curiosity." "What about it?" Have you considered that her natural aptitude might benefit from more advanced mathematical exposure? Not pressure, but opportunity. What kind of opportunity? Well, Riverside has a Saturday enrichment program for mathematically gifted children. It's designed for kids who need intellectual challenge beyond what their regular schools can provide. Sophie's only 8 years old. Age isn't as important as interest and ability. And from what you've told me, Sophie has both in abundance. I don't want to push her into being a child prodigy. She needs to be a normal kid. Of course, but she also needs to have her intellectual curiosity nurtured. There's a difference between pressure and opportunity. Ethan knew Becca was right. Sophie was constantly asking mathematical questions that went far beyond third-grade curriculum, often incorporating concepts she had picked up from overhearing his conversations or observing patterns in everyday life. What would this enrichment program look like Saturday mornings, 3 hours? Age-mixed groups working on mathematical puzzles? Logic problems? Basic programming concepts. Very informal, very focused on exploration rather than performance. And you think Sophie would enjoy it? I think Sophie would thrive in an environment where her mathematical thinking was understood and encouraged by both peers and teachers. The idea was appealing, but it also represented another step away from the simple, contained life Ethan had built for them. Let me think about it. Of course. And Ethan. The program coordinator is Dr. Jennifer Walsh, Sophie's endocrinologist. The same. She volunteers her time because she believes that gifted children with medical challenges often benefit from having their intellectual needs met alongside their healthcare needs. A week later, Ethan found himself driving Sophie to Riverside Community College on a Saturday morning, both of them nervous about this new adventure. Sophie wore her favorite purple dress and carried a backpack filled with notebooks, colored pencils, and a small stuffed dinosaur that served as her mathematical mascot. "Daddy, what if the other kids are much older and they think I'm too little? Then they'll learn that mathematical thinking doesn't depend on age, just like you taught me when you figured out that geometry problem last week." Sophie had recently amazed Ethan by calculating the optimal arrangement of furniture in their living room to maximize both floor space and natural light using principles of area optimization that most high school students would find challenging. The enrichment program met in the same mathematics building where Ethan worked nights, but during the day, it was filled with children ranging in age from 6 to 14, all engaged in mathematical exploration that was both rigorous and joyful. Walsh greeted them at the entrance, her warm smile helping to calm both father and daughter's nervousness. "Sophie, I'm so excited you're joining us today. We're working on a project involving mathematical patterns in nature. Are you interested in how mathematics appears in flower petals and seashells?" Sophie's eyes lit up with excitement. "Like the Fibonacci sequence in pine cones?" "Exactly like that. How did you know about Fibonacci numbers?" "Daddy showed me how to find them in lots of places. We count them on our walks." Dr. Walsh glanced at Ethan with an expression of impressed understanding. "Sophie, I think you're going to fit in perfectly here." As Ethan watched Sophie integrate seamlessly with the group of children, he realized that Becca had been right about providing opportunities for intellectual growth. Sophie didn't need protection from her own mathematical gifts. She needed an environment where those gifts could flourish naturally. When he picked Sophie up 3 hours later, she was practically vibrating with excitement. "Daddy, we learned about fractals and how to make infinite patterns with just simple rules. And there's a girl named Maya who's only 6, but she understands calculus concepts. And Dr. Walsh says next week we're going to study the mathematics of music. I take it you enjoyed yourself. It was the best morning ever. Can we come back next week?" As they drove home, Sophie chattering enthusiastically about mathematical discoveries and new friendships, Ethan felt a shift in his thinking about their future possibilities. For 3 years he had focused on maintaining stability and security for Sophie, but maybe stability wasn't the same thing as limitation. That evening he called Becca to thank her for the suggestion about the enrichment program. Sophie loved it, he reported. She's already planning mathematical experiments for next week. I'm so glad. She's going to thrive in that environment. Becca, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Why are you investing so much time in encouraging my mathematical career? You barely know me. There was a long pause before she answered. Honestly, because mathematical talent like yours is rare and valuable, and it seems wasteful for it to be hidden away. But also because I enjoy our conversations more than any professional interaction I've had in years. What do you mean? I mean that talking mathematics with you reminds me why I fell in love with the subject in the first place. Academic environments can become competitive and political in ways that drain the joy out of intellectual discovery. But when you explain mathematical concepts, there's a purity and elegance that I'd almost forgotten existed. Becca's honesty was both flattering and concerning. Ethan had been careful to keep their interactions professional, but he couldn't deny that he looked forward to their evening conversations with an anticipation that went beyond mathematical interest. I should probably mention, he said carefully, that I'm not really in a position to pursue personal relationships. Sophie has to be my priority. I understand completely. And I wasn't suggesting anything inappropriate. I just wanted you to know that our friendship has been meaningful to me. Friendship. The word felt both accurate and insufficient. It's been meaningful to me too. It's nice to remember that part of myself. Over the following month, their friendship deepened in ways that surprised them both. Becca began asking about Sophie's week, remembering details about doctor appointments and school projects. Ethan found himself sharing stories about single parenthood, the daily challenges of managing a chronic medical condition, the small victories that made everything worthwhile. One evening, Becca appeared in classroom 247 with a manila envelope that she placed carefully on the desk between them. I've been researching fellowship opportunities, she said, without preamble. I found something I think you should see. Becca, I told you I'm not ready to disrupt our stability for academic uncertainty. Just look at the information. Please. Inside the envelope was a detailed description of the Henderson Family Fellowship, along with application materials and a letter from Dr. Morrison at Ohio State. How did you get this? I contacted Dr. Morrison and explained your situation. Without identifying you specifically, I asked whether someone with your background and circumstances might be competitive for family-focused fellowship programs. And what did she say? She said that if the person I was describing was who she thought it was, she had been wondering for 3 years whatever happened to one of the most promising number theory students she had ever supervised. Dr. Morrison said that about me. She said that your research on prime gaps was groundbreaking work that deserved completion, and that personal circumstances that required educational interruption often made students stronger and more focused when they returned to academic work. Ethan stared at the letter written in Dr. Morrison's precise handwriting, expressing genuine enthusiasm for his potential return to the program. This fellowship provides full tuition health insurance and a living stipend that would actually be higher than what you're earning now, Becca continued. You could complete your dissertation while teaching part-time, maintain your current lifestyle, and provide Sophie with educational opportunities she couldn't access otherwise. What kind of educational opportunities? University lab schools, advanced placement programs, early college courses if she's ready for them. The fellowship includes educational benefits for dependents. Ethan felt hope and fear warring in his chest. The opportunity sounded ideal, but the risk of failure felt enormous. What if I've been away from research too long? What if I can't pick up where I left off? Then you'll learn what you need to learn and continue from where you are now. Mathematics isn't a race, Ethan. It's a journey. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Ethan spread the fellowship materials across their kitchen table and began reading carefully. The Henderson Family Fellowship had been established specifically for parents who had interrupted their education for family responsibilities. The program provided not just financial support, but childcare resources, family housing options, and flexible scheduling that acknowledged the realities of parenting. More compelling was the research opportunity. Dr. Morrison's letter outlined current developments in prime number theory that built directly on the work Ethan had been doing before Sarah's death. 3 years of mathematical progress hadn't made his research obsolete. It had created new avenues for exploration that his preliminary work could support. The application deadline was 6 weeks away. For the next several evenings, Becca helped Ethan prepare his fellowship application with the thoroughness she would have brought to her own research projects. She reviewed his old papers, helped him update his literature review, and encouraged him to contact Dr. Morrison directly to discuss the current state of his research interests. The phone call with his former advisor was both nostalgic and energizing. Dr. Morrison remembered his work clearly and expressed genuine excitement about the possibility of his return to the program. "Ethan," she said, "your research on prime distribution patterns was some of the most innovative work I've seen at the graduate level. The mathematical community would benefit enormously from your completing that research." "Morrison, I've been out of academic mathematics for 3 years. I'm not sure I'm still capable of doctoral-level work. Mathematics isn't something you forget, like riding a bicycle, and based on the insights you've developed since leaving the program, I suspect you're better equipped for advanced research now than you were 3 years ago." "What do you mean?" "I mean that raising a child with complex medical needs has probably taught you patience, persistence, and practical problem-solving skills that most graduate students lack. Those qualities are essential for successful mathematical research." The encouragement from Dr. Morrison gave Ethan the confidence to complete his fellowship application with genuine optimism about the outcome. 1 month later, on a cold February evening, Ethan arrived for his shift to find Becca waiting in classroom 247 with an expression of barely contained excitement. "I have news," she said without preamble. "What kind of news?" "I spoke with Dean Rodriguez today. Riverside is interested in developing a partnership program with Ohio State that would allow advanced mathematics students to complete research while teaching undergraduate courses here." "What does that mean?" "It means that if you receive the fellowship, you might be able to complete your dissertation research while teaching part-time at Riverside. You wouldn't have to relocate to Columbus or disrupt Sophie's medical care or educational programs." That sounds too good to be true. The mathematics department here needs faculty with advanced research experience, and the college administration is excited about the publicity benefits of being associated with cutting-edge mathematical research. It would be a win-win arrangement. Before Ethan could respond fully, his phone buzzed with a call from an Ohio number he didn't recognize. "Dr. Parker. This is Dr. Elizabeth Morrison from Ohio State University." His heart began racing as he answered the call, Becca watching anxiously from across the room. "Dr. Morrison, good to hear from you." "Ethan, I'm calling with excellent news. The Fellowship Committee has unanimously approved your application for the Henderson Family Fellowship. Congratulations." The words hit him with such force that he had to sit down, his legs suddenly unsteady. "I got it. I actually got the fellowship." "You got it." The committee was extraordinarily impressed with your research proposal and your unique perspective on balancing academic excellence with family responsibilities. We're thrilled to have you returning to the program." When Ethan hung up the phone, Becca was smiling so broadly that her whole face seemed to glow with joy. "You got it, didn't you?" "I got it. I actually got the fellowship." Without thinking, they hugged, a spontaneous expression of shared excitement that lasted perhaps a moment longer than purely professional friendship would require. When they separated, both seemed suddenly aware of the shift that had occurred in their relationship over the past months, the way intellectual collaboration had evolved into something deeper and more personal. Ethan Becca said quietly, "I need to tell you something. What I'm proud of you, not just for getting the fellowship, but for having the courage to pursue this opportunity despite all the risks involved. I couldn't have done it without your encouragement. Your belief in my abilities made it possible for me to believe in them again." They stood there for a moment, looking at each other across the small classroom that had become the setting for their unusual friendship. "What happens now?" Becca asked. "Now I call Sophie's doctor to discuss logistics for maintaining her medical care if we need to spend time in Columbus. Now I start preparing to return to mathematical research after 3 years away. Now I figure out how to be both a graduate student and a single father. And now you allow yourself to be excited about returning to the work you love." Yeah, that too. That evening, as Ethan walked through the campus after finishing his shift, he felt a lightness he hadn't experienced since before Sarah's death. Not the absence of responsibility or worry, but the presence of genuine hope about their future. Sophie would have educational opportunities he couldn't have provided on a janitor's salary. His research on prime distribution patterns would finally reach completion. And perhaps most surprisingly, he had found in Becca Harrison not just a professional colleague, but a friend whose intellectual companionship had reminded him of possibilities he had thought were permanently closed. As he drove home through the quiet streets of Riverside, Ethan allowed himself to imagine what the next few years might bring. Sophie, thriving in advanced educational programs, her mathematical gifts nurtured by teachers who understood her potential. His own research contributing to mathematical knowledge in ways that justified the sacrifices Sarah had made to support his original graduate school ambitions. And maybe, if he was very fortunate, continued friendship with someone who had seen his hidden potential and encouraged him to reclaim it. The mathematics of their lives was about to become significantly more complex, but Ethan was finally ready for that challenge. December arrived early, with the first real snowfall of the season, blanketing Riverside Community College in pristine white that made the historic brick buildings look like something from a Christmas card. The timing felt symbolic to Ethan, who was still waiting to hear about his fellowship application while watching Sophie build snow angels in their apartment courtyard, with the determination she brought to all her projects. "Daddy, come help me make a mathematician snow angel," Sophie called from the courtyard below their second-floor window. "What makes a snow angel mathematical?" Ethan called back, pulling on his jacket to join her outside. "It has to be perfectly symmetrical, and the wing angles have to be exactly 30 degrees from the body line," Sophie explained with the serious tone she used when applying mathematical concepts to everyday activities. As Ethan helped Sophie create her geometrically precise snow angel, he thought about how much their lives had changed since that first evening when he had helped Becca with her convergence proof. The friendship that had developed between them had become one of the brightest parts of his week, their evening conversations ranging from abstract mathematical theory to practical discussions about teaching methods and student engagement. "Professor Harrison is coming to the college Christmas party tomorrow night," Sophie mentioned, as they put the finishing touches on her snow angel. "Mrs. Chen said all the teachers and workers are invited, and there's going to be hot chocolate and cookies. How do you know Professor Harrison is coming?" "She told me yesterday when we saw her in the library. She said she's excited to see our whole family there." "Our whole family?" Sophie looked at him with the patient expression she used when adults were being deliberately dense. "You, me, and Professor Harrison. That's our family now, isn't it?" The innocent statement hit Ethan with unexpected force. Somewhere in the past few months, without him fully realizing it, Becca had become integrated into their daily lives in ways that went far beyond casual friendship. "Sophie, Professor Harrison is our friend, a very good friend, but calling her family might make her feel uncomfortable. Why, she loves us. I can tell. And you love her too, right?" Ethan felt heat rise in his cheeks. "Sweetheart, adult relationships are complicated." "No, they're not. You either love people or you don't. Everything else is just grown-ups making things harder than they need to be. That evening, the Riverside Community College annual Christmas party filled the main auditorium with faculty, staff, students, and their families. The space had been transformed with twinkling lights, evergreen garlands, and tables laden with homemade cookies and warm cider. Ethan arrived with Sophie, who had insisted on wearing her best red dress for the occasion. She looked around the room with wide eyes, taking in the festive atmosphere while searching for familiar faces among the crowd. "There she is," Sophie pointed across the room to where Becca stood near the refreshment table, talking with several other faculty members. She wore a deep blue dress that brought out her eyes, her blonde hair styled in soft waves that caught the party lights. Before Ethan could stop her, Sophie was weaving through the crowd, heading straight for Becca with the determination of a child on a mission. By the time Ethan caught up, Sophie had already launched into animated conversation about her snow angel project and the mathematical principles involved in its construction. Ethan Dean Rodriguez appeared at his elbow, a warm smile on her face. "I'm so glad you could make it tonight. And this must be the famous Sophie I've heard so much about." "Sophie, this is Dean Rodriguez. She's the principal of the college." Sophie executed a perfect curtsy that she had learned from watching old movies with Mrs. Chen. "It's very nice to meet you, Dean Rodriguez. Your school is very pretty, and everyone here is really nice to my daddy." "Your daddy is a valuable member of our community," Dean Rodriguez replied. "Professor Harrison has told me wonderful things about both of you. Professor Harrison is going to be my new mummy," Sophie announced with the casual confidence of childhood, apparently having decided to move beyond her father's concerns about complicated adult relationships. The conversation around them went silent for a moment. Ethan felt his face burning with embarrassment, while Becca looked equally flustered. Dean Rodriguez, however, smiled warmly. "That sounds like a very happy development," she said diplomatically. "Sophie, would you like to help me judge the cookie decorating contest? I could use an expert assistant." As Dean Rodriguez led Sophie away to explore the party activities, Ethan and Becca found themselves standing alone near the refreshment table, both struggling to recover from 8-year-old honesty. "I'm sorry," Ethan began. "She gets these ideas in her head and don't apologize." Becca interrupted. "Children see things more clearly than adults sometimes." Before Ethan could respond, the conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Michael Ashford, a visiting professor from the State University who was serving as the evening's guest speaker. Dr. Ashford was everything Ethan remembered disliking about certain academic personalities during his graduate school days. Arrogant, dismissive of teaching institutions. He considered beneath his status and fond of making pronouncements about intellectual hierarchy. Rebecca Dr. Ashford approached with the false warmth of someone networking for professional advantage. "Wonderful to see you here among the community college crowd. Still slumming it in remedial education, I see. I'm teaching mathematics to students who are genuinely excited to learn," Becca replied coolly. "It's surprisingly rewarding. I'm sure it is, my dear, though I can't imagine the intellectual stimulation compares to real research environments." His gaze dismissed Ethan entirely, the way certain academics had always looked through support staff as if they were invisible. "Actually," Becca said, her voice taking on an edge that Ethan recognized as dangerous, "I've been engaged in some fascinating theoretical discussions right here at Riverside. The level of mathematical insight I've encountered has been quite remarkable." "Oh, please." Dr. Ashford laughed condescendingly. "Community college mathematics? What could possibly be remarkable about remedial algebra and basic statistics?" Several faculty members had drifted closer, drawn by the tension in the conversation. Ethan noticed Dean Rodriguez watching from across the room, her expression alert to potential problems. "Would you like me to show you?" Becca asked, her green eyes flashing with challenge. "Show me what?" "The kind of mathematical thinking that happens at this supposedly inferior institution." Dr. Ashford's smile was patronizing. "My dear, I've been researching advanced mathematical theory for 20 years. I seriously doubt that anything happening in this environment could surprise me. Becca walked to the small whiteboard that had been set up for the evening's presentation, picking up a marker with deliberate precision. The room gradually quieted as people realized something significant was happening. "Here's a problem," she announced, writing an elegant equation that filled half the board. It was a complex differential equation involving multiple variables, the kind of problem that would challenge graduate students at prestigious universities. This represents a mathematical relationship that appears in quantum field theory, weather modeling, and population dynamics. Dr. Ashford examined the equation with growing interest. Interesting construction. Non-linear partial differential with boundary conditions. Solvable, but it would require substantial computational analysis. "Actually," Becca said, her voice carrying across the now silent room, "it has an elegant analytical solution if you approach it correctly." She paused, looking directly at Dr. Ashford. "Would you care to attempt it, my dear? This isn't a graduate seminar. Surely we don't need to turn a Christmas party into an academic competition." "Of course not." Becca agreed smoothly. "Unless you're confident in your abilities, the solution is quite beautiful when you see it clearly." Dr. Ashford's academic pride wouldn't allow him to back down from a public challenge. "Very well, though I hardly think this is appropriate entertainment for a community college gathering." For the next 10 minutes, Dr. Ashford worked at the whiteboard, applying standard techniques and making steady progress toward a computational solution. His approach was methodical and competent, exactly what Ethan would have expected from someone with 20 years of research experience. But there was something familiar about the problem structure that nagged at Ethan's consciousness. The boundary conditions. The way the variables interacted, the subtle symmetries hidden in the equation's construction, reminded him of problems he had encountered in his own number theory research, where elegant solutions often came from recognizing deeper patterns rather than grinding through computational complexity. As Dr. Ashford reached an impasse in his calculation, clearly frustrated by the equation's resistance to standard approaches, Becca turned to face the gathered crowd. "Mathematics isn't just about credentials or institutional prestige," she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "It's about insight, creativity, the ability to see patterns that others miss." Her eyes found Ethan across the room. True mathematical genius can emerge anywhere from anyone who has the vision to look beyond surface appearances. Then, in a moment that would be retold in campus legend for years to come, Becca issued her challenge to the room. "This equation has an elegant solution that can be derived in minutes rather than hours, using insight rather than computation. Solve this equation and I'll marry you." The words hung in the air like a dare, clearly intended as hyperbole, but carrying an electric charge that made everyone in the room hold their breath. Dr. Ashford stopped his calculations, looking annoyed at the interruption. Faculty members exchanged glances, uncertain whether they were witnessing academic theater or something more serious. Sophie's voice cut through the tension from across the room. "Daddy, you should try. You're really good at math problems." Every head in the room turned toward Ethan, who felt suddenly exposed under dozens of curious gazes. In that moment, he faced a choice that would define not just his own future, but his daughter's understanding of courage, intellectual honesty, and the importance of using one's gifts in service of truth. The silence in the auditorium was profound, the kind of quiet that happens when a room full of people collectively holds its breath. Ethan stood frozen near the refreshment table, feeling the weight of every gaze in the room. Dr. Ashford had stopped his calculations to stare at the maintenance worker, who had apparently been nominated by a child to solve a graduate-level mathematical problem. "I'm sorry," Dr. Ashford said with barely contained amusement, "but did that little girl just suggest that the janitor should attempt this equation?" The condescension in his voice ignited something in Ethan's chest. Not anger exactly, but a fierce clarity about what mattered in this moment. Sophie believed in him absolutely. Becca had created this challenge specifically because she knew he could meet it. And every person in this room was about to learn something important about the relationship between credentials and capability. Sophie Ethan said quietly, walking toward the front of the room, "You should know that challenging problems require careful thinking. I know, Daddy, but you're the best careful thinker I know." Ethan reached the whiteboard where Dr. Ashford still stood, marker in hand, his computational approach half complete and clearly stalled. The visiting professor stepped aside with exaggerated courtesy, his expression suggesting he was indulging an amusing but ultimately embarrassing spectacle. "Please," Dr. Ashford said, gesturing toward the board by all means. Ethan studied the equation Becca had written, letting his mind settle into the familiar rhythm of mathematical analysis. The problem was indeed complex, involving multiple variables and non-linear relationships that would typically require extensive computational work to solve. But as he examined the structure more carefully, patterns began to emerge. The boundary conditions weren't arbitrary. They reflected an underlying symmetry in the physical system the equation represented. The variable relationships followed patterns he recognized from his work on modular forms, mathematical structures that revealed hidden connections between seemingly unrelated problems. "May I?" Ethan asked, reaching for the marker. Dr. Ashford handed it over with a patronizing smile. "Certainly. Though I should warn you, this level of mathematics typically requires years of specialized training." Sometimes, Ethan said quietly, beginning to write, "the most elegant solutions come from seeing problems with fresh eyes." Instead of following Dr. Ashford's computational approach, Ethan began by identifying the symmetries hidden in the equation's structure. With quick, confident strokes, he demonstrated how the apparent complexity collapsed when viewed through the lens of invariant theory, mathematical principles that revealed the essential relationships beneath surface complications. The room was utterly silent as Ethan worked his marker, moving with increasing fluency as the solution took shape. Faculty members leaned forward, trying to follow his reasoning. Students who had been enjoying cookies and conversation found themselves witnessing something they sensed was extraordinary, even if they couldn't fully understand the mathematics involved. Becca watched with growing admiration as Ethan's approach revealed insights she had hoped for, but hadn't been certain he would see. His solution wasn't just correct, it was elegant, showing connections between different areas of mathematics that most specialists would never think to explore. The key insight, Ethan explained as he wrote, his voice growing more confident with each line, is recognizing that this differential equation is actually equivalent to a much simpler algebraic relationship when you factor out the invariant subgroups. He turned to face the room, marker still in hand. "Once you see that structure, the solution becomes almost obvious." Dr. Ashford's expression had shifted from amusement to confusion to something approaching shock as he realized that the maintenance worker was not only solving the problem correctly, but doing so with sophistication that exceeded his own approach. "That's actually brilliant," Dr. Ashford admitted reluctantly. "I was getting bogged down in computational complexity when the real insight was geometric." "Where did you learn invariant theory?" "Ohio State," Ethan replied simply. "I studied under Professor Morrison in the number theory program, Elizabeth Morrison, but she only works with the most advanced doctoral candidates. Her research on modular forms is groundbreaking." "It is," Ethan agreed. "I was fortunate to work with her before circumstances required me to leave the program." The revelation rippled through the room as people began to understand that they had been witnessing not a miraculous amateur achievement, but the demonstration of expertise that had been hidden in plain sight for years. Dean Rodriguez stepped forward, her expression showing the rapid recalculation happening in her mind as she processed this new information about one of her maintenance staff. "Mr. Parker," she said carefully, "perhaps we should discuss your background in mathematics more thoroughly. When you have time, of course." "Actually," Becca interjected, moving to stand beside Ethan at the whiteboard, There's something else everyone should know. She looked at Ethan for permission to continue, and when he nodded, she turned back to the room. Ethan has applied for a prestigious fellowship to complete his doctoral dissertation. His research on prime number distribution could have significant implications for cryptography and computer science. Wait, said Professor Martinez from the computer science department. Are you saying our night janitor is conducting research that could impact cybersecurity applications? I'm saying? Becca replied that talent and intelligence don't always wear the uniforms we expect them to wear. Sophie had made her way to the front of the room during the commotion, and now she tugged on Ethan's sleeve to get his attention. Daddy, you solved Professor Harrison's problem. Does that mean you have to marry her now? The laughter that erupted from the room was warm and delighted rather than mocking the kind of laughter that comes when tension breaks in the most charming possible way. Ethan felt his face flush as he looked down at his daughter's expectant expression. Sophie Professor Harrison was speaking hypothetically. Actually, Becca interrupted, her own cheeks pink, but her voice steady. I meant every word. She looked directly at Ethan, her green eyes bright with emotion. You solved an equation that has been sitting on my desk for weeks, using insight I never would have found on my own. You've shown me that true mathematical thinking transcends institutional boundaries. And you've reminded me why I fell in love with mathematics in the first place. The room had gone quiet again, but this time it was the hush of witnessing something profound and personal, rather than the tension of academic challenge. Becca Ethan said softly, You can't be serious. I'm serious about recognizing genius when I see it. I'm serious about the fact that you've become one of the most important people in my life. And I'm serious about believing that some mathematical problems have solutions that change everything. What about different backgrounds, different social positions? All the complications you mentioned before. What about them? Becca smiled, reaching for his hand. Mathematics taught me that the most beautiful relationships are the ones that initially seem impossible, but turn out to be elegant when you find the right approach. Sophie clapped her hands together with delight. Does this mean we're really going to be a family now? Sweetheart, Ethan said, kneeling down to her level. That depends on whether Professor Harrison is really sure about this very big decision. I've never been more sure of anything, Becca said, and the certainty in her voice carried across the entire room. The weeks following the Christmas party brought changes that neither Ethan nor Becca could have anticipated. Word of the evening's mathematical drama had spread far beyond Riverside Community College, picked up by local newspapers, and eventually shared on social media platforms where stories of hidden talent and unexpected romance always found eager audiences. Janitor solves complex equation. Wins professor's heart, read the headline in the Riverside Tribune, accompanied by a photo of Ethan at the whiteboard and an interview with Dean Rodriguez about recognizing extraordinary ability in unexpected places. More importantly for their immediate future, the attention had reached Ohio State University, where Professor Morrison had called to inform Ethan that his fellowship application had been accepted with some unusual modifications. The committee was already impressed with your research proposal, Professor Morrison explained during their phone conversation, but the publicity about your mathematical insights has generated additional interest. We'd like to offer you the Henderson Family Fellowship as originally discussed, but with the option to complete much of your research remotely from Riverside Community College. Remotely, Ethan asked, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. The college has approached us about establishing a partnership program that would allow advanced mathematics students to work on theoretical research while teaching undergraduate courses. You would be our pilot candidate for this arrangement. What would that look like, practically? You'd teach part-time at Riverside while completing your dissertation. Regular consultations with me via video conference. Periodic visits to Columbus for presentations and committee meetings. Access to our research databases and library resources. It's unconventional, but your work on prime distribution patterns could be completed from anywhere with proper support. When Ethan called Becca to share the news, Her excitement was immediate and infectious. "This is perfect," she said, her voice bright with joy. "You can complete your research. I can continue building the advanced mathematics program here, and Sophie can stay in the community she knows with the medical care she needs." "And what about us?" Ethan asked the question that had been building in his mind since her public proposal. "What about us, Becca? You can't really want to marry someone you've known for 4 months." That was a beautiful gesture, but we should be practical about this. There was a long pause before she answered. "Ethan, may I come over?" This conversation shouldn't happen on the phone. An hour later, Becca was sitting in their small living room while Sophie showed her the latest mathematical art project, geometric patterns created with colored pencils that demonstrated principles of symmetry and proportion. "Sophie, these are beautiful," Becca said, examining each drawing carefully. "You're developing a real eye for mathematical relationships." Professor Harrison Sophie said seriously, "Are you really going to marry my daddy?" "That's what we need to discuss, sweetheart. Would that make you happy?" "Very happy. I've been praying for a mummy who understands math and likes smart questions. God must have been listening really good, really well." Both adults corrected automatically, then smiled at their synchronized response. After Sophie had been tucked into bed with stories about numbers that danced in magical patterns, Becca and Ethan sat together on his small couch, hot tea steaming on the coffee table between them. "I need to explain something about my proposal," Becca began. "It wasn't just about the mathematics, and it wasn't just a dramatic gesture for the crowd. What was it about? It was about recognizing that I've been falling in love with you for months, and that watching you solve that equation was the moment I realized I didn't want to spend another day pretending that what we have is just friendship." Ethan set down his tea, looking at her with surprise and hope warring in his expression. "You've been falling in love with me? How could I not? You're brilliant and humble and devoted to your daughter. You've rebuilt your entire life around her needs without a trace of self-pity. You've maintained your intellectual curiosity despite working jobs that don't challenge you. You've treated me as an equal colleague when you had every reason to feel intimidated by academic credentials." Becca: "I'm a widowed single father with complicated circumstances. My life isn't simple or easy. I don't want simple or easy. I want real. I want a partner who understands that love means supporting each other's dreams, not competing for individual achievement. And you think we could build that together?" "I think we've been building it already. Sophie adores me. You make me want to be a better mathematician and teacher, and we've created something between the three of us that feels remarkably like family." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, processing emotions he had kept carefully contained for months. "I need you to understand something about my situation with Sarah. When she died, I thought I would never love anyone that way again. I thought Sophie and I would just be a family of 2, and that would be enough. And now I'm terrified of caring about you as much as I do, not because I don't think you're worthy of love, but because I'm not sure I could survive losing someone again." Becca reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers with gentle certainty. "Ethan, love always involves risk, but the alternative, protecting ourselves by refusing to open our hearts, isn't really living. What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we stop pretending that what we feel for each other is casual friendship. I'm suggesting we explore the possibility that 2 people with complicated pasts might be able to build an uncomplicated future together. And your marriage proposal was sincere. Not because I expect you to say yes immediately, but because I want you to know that I'm thinking about permanent commitment. I want you to know that when I imagine my future, it includes you and Sophie." Ethan looked around their small apartment at Sophie's artwork, covering the refrigerator at the medical supplies organized neatly on the kitchen counter at the advanced mathematics books he had been studying in preparation for returning to research. It was a life built around necessity and responsibility, but it had room for more. It had room for the kind of love that enhanced rather than complicated their existing happiness. Becca, if we were to seriously consider this marriage, building a life together, what would that look like? Practically, I think it would look like combining our strengths. You'd complete your dissertation while teaching advanced courses. I'd continue developing the mathematics program. Sophie would have two parents who understand her intellectual gifts and support her medical needs. We'd all have the security of family and the excitement of shared academic interests. And if my research doesn't work out, if I can't complete the dissertation, then we'll figure out something else together. That's what families do. That night, after Becca had gone home to her apartment, and Sophie was sleeping peacefully in the next room, Ethan sat at his kitchen table with a legal pad and began making lists. Not mathematical calculations this time, but practical considerations about building a future that honored both love and responsibility. Spring arrived early in Riverside, bringing with it the kind of warm, hopeful days that made everything feel possible. Ethan had officially begun his fellowship research, working from a small office space that Riverside Community College had provided for their new mathematics research associate. His teaching load was light, just 2 courses per semester, but deeply fulfilling as he guided community college students through mathematical concepts he had once thought they would never encounter. The wedding planning had been surprisingly simple, mostly because both Ethan and Becca wanted a ceremony that reflected their actual lives rather than abstract ideals about romance. They would marry in the college chapel in late June, surrounded by the community of faculty, staff, and students who had watched their relationship develop. Over the following weeks, house hunting became a family adventure that revealed new dimensions of their relationship. Sophie appointed herself as the official inspector of bedroom sizes and bathroom accessibility for medical equipment. Becca evaluated each potential home's Wi-Fi capabilities and workspace potential. Ethan focused on practical concerns like school districts, proximity to medical facilities, and monthly payment calculations. They found their perfect house on a quiet street 3 blocks from the college campus. A 1920s craftsman bungalow with original hardwood floors, built-in bookshelves, and a large front porch that reminded Ethan of houses in old family photographs. "It needs a lot of work," Ethan said, as they stood in the empty living room, surrounded by the echoes of their footsteps and their own excited voices. "It has good bones," Becca replied, running her hands along the original crown molding. "And it's been waiting for the right family to bring it back to life. I can see my bedroom right up there," Sophie announced, pointing toward the staircase that led to 3 sunny bedrooms on the 2nd floor, "and the backyard is perfect for mathematical gardens." "Mathematical gardens?" Ethan asked. "Gardens planted in geometric patterns, like flower spirals that follow the Fibonacci sequence, or vegetable rows arranged in prime number intervals." The late spring semester brought new challenges and unexpected joys as Ethan and Becca navigated their evolving roles both personally and professionally. Ethan's advanced algebra course had attracted students from across the region, word having spread about the community college professor, whose teaching methods made complex concepts accessible and exciting. Mr. Parker Maria Gonzalez approached his desk after class one Thursday afternoon. She was a 35-year-old single mother who had returned to college to pursue a nursing degree after her divorce. "I've never understood mathematics before, but the way you explain it makes sense to me for the first time. What makes sense about it now that didn't before? You show us why the math matters, not just how to do the calculations. Like when you explained statistics using examples from medical research, suddenly I could see how I'll use this information when I'm working with patients." These interactions reminded Ethan daily why he had fallen in love with teaching in the first place. Community college students brought life experience and genuine motivation that made every class discussion richer and more meaningful than the abstract theoretical conversations he remembered from graduate school. "You're pushing yourself too hard," Becca observed one evening, finding him at their kitchen table surrounded by notebooks filled with complex equations and empty coffee cups. The Henderson Fellowship requires significant progress on my research. I can't let Professor Morrison down. Professor Morrison doesn't expect you to sacrifice your health or your relationship with Sophie to complete this work. I know, but the mathematics is so close to clicking. I can feel the solution to the prime distribution problem hovering just beyond my understanding. Another few weeks of concentrated work, and I think I'll have it. Becca sat down beside him, examining the pages of calculations that represented months of intense effort. What if you took a different approach, instead of trying to solve everything in isolation? What if we worked on it together? Becca, number theory isn't your specialty. No, but mathematical reasoning is. And sometimes a fresh perspective can reveal patterns that become invisible when you're too deep in the details. Over the following days, their evening conversations began to include collaborative work on Ethan's research. Becca's questions and insights didn't solve his theoretical problems directly, but they helped him see his own work more clearly, identify assumptions he had been making unconsciously, and consider approaches he might not have explored on his own. "Look at this pattern," Becca said one evening, pointing to a sequence of numbers in his calculations. "You're treating these prime gaps as random variations, but what if they follow a deeper structure that only becomes visible at much larger scales?" The observation led Ethan to a breakthrough that had been eluding him for months. By examining prime distributions across vastly larger numerical ranges than previous research had considered, he began to see patterns that supported his original hypothesis in ways that were both elegant and computationally verifiable. "Becca, you're brilliant," he said, pulling her into an enthusiastic hug as the implications of her insight became clear. "I just asked the right question at the right moment. The brilliance is yours. It's ours. This research is becoming something neither of us could have accomplished alone." The morning of their wedding dawned clear and bright, with the kind of perfect June weather that made Riverside Community College's campus look like something from a fairy tale. The ceremony would take place in the college chapel, surrounded by the community that had watched their relationship develop from those first tentative conversations to the deep partnership they had built together. As Ethan straightened his tie in the small room adjacent to the chapel, he thought about how different this day felt from the nervous excitement he had experienced before his first wedding to Sarah. Then he had been a young graduate student with unlimited possibilities and very little understanding of how fragile happiness could be. Now he was a man who had lost everything and rebuilt his life around different priorities, approaching marriage with gratitude rather than expectation. "Dad, you look really handsome," Sophie announced, appearing in his doorway, wearing her flower girl dress and carrying a basket filled with rose petals arranged in mathematical spirals. "Thank you, sweetheart. Are you ready to be our flower mathematician?" "I've been practicing all week. The petals will create a Fibonacci sequence that leads from the back of the chapel to the altar, and each row will receive a different prime number of flowers. Professor Harrison is going to love that." She's not Professor Harrison anymore today. Today she becomes Mommy Becca. The simple statement carried more emotional weight than Ethan had expected. For the past year, Sophie had been gradually transitioning from calling Becca Professor Harrison to Miss Becca to simply Becca, but the decision to use Mommy represented a choice that honored both her birth mother's memory and her excitement about their expanding family. The ceremony itself was perfect in its simplicity. Riverside's chapel was filled with faculty, students, and community members who had become invested in their love story. Dean Rodriguez served as the officiant, having taken online ordination classes specifically to perform the wedding. Professor Morrison had driven from Columbus to attend, bringing with her several of Ethan's former colleagues who wanted to witness his return to academic life. As the processional music began, Sophie walked down the aisle with perfect mathematical precision, scattering flower petals according to her carefully planned sequence. Her concentration was absolute, her small face serious with the importance of executing her role correctly. Then Becca appeared at the back of the chapel, and Ethan felt his breath catch in his throat. She wore a simple ivory dress that highlighted her natural beauty. Her blonde hair arranged in soft waves adorned with the wildflowers Sophie had insisted belonged in any proper mathematical wedding. She carried a bouquet that artfully combined traditional roses with the dandelions Sophie had declared essential for good luck. Dearly beloved Dean Rodriguez began, we gather today to celebrate not just the marriage of Ethan and Rebecca, but the formation of a family that represents the best of our community values. These two people have shown us that love can emerge from intellectual respect, that families can be built on shared purpose, and that second chances are among life's greatest gifts. The ceremony included vows they had written together, mathematical metaphors for their commitment, that made the assembled crowd smile with recognition and affection. Becca, Ethan said, his voice steady despite his overwhelming emotions. You taught me that some equations have solutions more beautiful than anything we initially imagined possible. You showed me that love multiplies rather than divides, that partnership creates exponential rather than linear growth in happiness. Ethan, Becca replied, tears shining in her eyes. You proved to me that true mathematical elegance comes not from complexity, but from finding the simplest path to profound truth. You showed me that the most important research we can do is building a life that honors both intellectual curiosity and human love. When Dean Rodriguez pronounced them husband and wife, the chapel erupted in applause that seemed to shake the rafters. Sophie cheered louder than anyone, throwing rose petals into the air with complete disregard for mathematical precision. The reception was held in the college's main courtyard, decorated with lights strung between the mature oak trees and tables arranged to encourage conversation between the diverse groups of people who had come to celebrate with them. As the evening drew to a close and guests began to drift home, Ethan and Becca found themselves alone on the chapel steps with Sophie, who had fallen asleep against Becca's shoulder during the final speeches. We did it, Becca said softly, adjusting Sophie's position so the child could sleep more comfortably. We did, Ethan agreed, though I'm not entirely sure what it is. We solved the equation. We found the elegant solution to building a life that honors both love and mathematics, both individual dreams and family responsibilities. And what does that solution look like? It looks like this, Becca said, gesturing around them at the college campus where they had met the community that had supported them, the child sleeping peacefully between them. It looks like finding people who see your gifts and call you to use them fully. It looks like building something larger than any of us could create alone. As they walked across campus toward their new home, carrying Sophie between them, Ethan reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, he had been a janitor, working night shifts to pay for his daughter's medical care, his intellectual gifts hidden behind a maintenance uniform, his dreams deferred indefinitely for practical necessity. Now he was Dr. Ethan Parker, mathematics professor and research fellow, married to a colleague who understood both his professional aspirations and his devotion to Sophie. Their house was filled with advanced mathematics textbooks and children's artwork research materials and medical supplies, the comfortable chaos of a family that had learned to balance multiple kinds of love. Daddy, Sophie murmured sleepily as they reached their front door. Is our family complete now? Yes, sweetheart, Ethan replied, looking at his wife and daughter in the porch light. Our family is exactly complete. 3 years after their wedding, Dr. Ethan Parker stood before the International Conference on Number Theory in Stockholm, presenting research that had emerged from his collaboration with his wife and colleagues at Riverside Community College. His work on prime distribution patterns had indeed proved groundbreaking, contributing to advances in cryptographic security that would benefit millions of people worldwide. In the audience, 11-year-old Sophie Parker sat beside her mother following the presentation with the mathematical sophistication of a teenager while maintaining the enthusiastic curiosity that made her extraordinary. She had been invited to attend the conference after her own research on geometric patterns in nature had earned recognition from the National Science Foundation's youth program. Dr. Rebecca Parker had been promoted to Dean of Mathematics and Sciences at Riverside, which had expanded from a community college to a 4-year institution known for innovative programs that recognized talent regardless of traditional academic backgrounds. Their success had inspired similar initiatives at colleges across the country, proving that intellectual excellence could flourish when institutions committed to seeing potential rather than pedigree. The building that housed Ethan's original night shift janitorial duties now featured a bronze plaque near the entrance to classroom 247. It read, "Intelligence has no uniform. Genius appears everywhere, waiting for someone brave enough to recognize it, in honor of all the hidden brilliance that waits to be discovered." Sometimes the most profound equations aren't solved in university laboratories or published in prestigious journals. Sometimes they're worked out at kitchen tables by families who understand that love plus respect plus shared dreams always equals a future worth believing in. And sometimes the most elegant solutions are the ones that prove genius can appear anywhere, wearing any uniform, carrying any background, ready to change the world when someone finally bothers to look closely enough to see it. Friends, if this story touched your heart, please don't let it end here. Hit that like button to let us know this message of hope and second chances resonated with you. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that prove extraordinary things happen when ordinary people choose kindness and courage. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that it's never too late to pursue your dreams, that talent can emerge from the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the family we need finds us exactly when we need them most. Drop a comment below and tell us about a time when someone believed in your potential when you had stopped believing in yourself. Your story might inspire someone else who needs hope today. Until next time, remember that every ending is really a beginning in disguise, and that love truly does multiply when we have the courage to share it.